Hello and welcome back to another video from the Mike Live in 5 channel. On today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Obviously, the international break is over. Football is back. Brentford travel to Everton on Saturday. And I thought instead of doing a wrap of the Bournemouth game and look ahead to the Everton game in the way that I normally do them in terms of the screenshots and the stats, etc., I thought today what we'd do, considering we're about a quarter of the way through the season, just a bit more, I thought we could look at things that we've learnt about Brentford this season. So this is going to be 5 things that we've learnt about Brentford. I'm going to talk about our overall game state this season, the amount of goals we're conceding, the amount of goals we're scoring, some of the key players that have stood out, where they could get better, what they've done well, and we're also going to look ahead briefly to Everton right towards the end. But it's something a little bit different. I'm going to be using some of the screenshots that I've collected over the last couple of games, looking at some stats in depth and comparing some of our highest performers with other high performers in the league. Just before we get going, guys, remember to drop a subscription down below. Comment what you think of our season so far, how you're feeling ahead of the Everton game on Saturday. And if you haven't already, check out our Bournemouth full time, which you can find over on the Elam Road podcast account. Link for that video will be in the description. Without further ado, this is 5 things that we've learnt about Brentford this season. So the first thing I want to talk about, call it game state, momentum, field tilt, whatever you want to label it. The first thing that I want to talk about today is chaos. It has been absolute chaos supporting Brentford this season. 22 goals scored, 22 goals conceded. I don't think there's a more confusing, I don't think there's a more exciting team in the league this season. Obviously, we've got a pristine home record. The only time we've dropped points was at home against West Ham, and probably what was definitely not our most disappointing, because there was a certain result on a Monday night a couple of weeks ago that will hurt for a very long time, but probably one of our most underwhelming in terms of the teams that we've played at home. You would think, given West Ham's form this season, that it would have been another 3 points, but it was important to bounce back against a good Bournemouth side after that Fulham game, and that's exactly what we did. And the thing with Brentford this season is that I go into every game and I don't really know what to expect. Given the level of opposition we've played in the away games, you haven't been able to take too much from that. But we were speaking about it on the podcast, and I think that it would be fair to say that in those games that we've played against the top 6, your Liverpools, your Spurs, your Cities, your Uniteds, we've never been out of those games, which is something really positive. And going into that Fulham game, I think what we all kind of thought was, right, well, this is the first time we're going away to an opposition where we feel like we can win. Whereas in the previous games against those bigger clubs, we were kind of going in with a bit more hope, which is why it made it so disappointing to lose against Fulham in that fashion. But I think what I'm trying to say in terms of this section is we're so unpredictable this season. I'm thinking about games like Ipswich, where we concede twice so early on within the space of a few minutes. I'm thinking about the Spurs game when we go 1-0 up and then again we concede very, very quickly. I'm also thinking about the United game in the second half. After a really positive first half going in at 1-0, we end up coming out and kind of, once one goes in, you're waiting for the next one to go in. And that's exactly what happened against Fulham as well. These are patterns that we saw last season. We spoke about it on the podcast. We tended to concede in twos last season. And we're sort of slipping into familiar patterns, which is something I'd not liking. As someone who supports the club, it's obviously great for the neutral, but when you look at the results on a Saturday, you don't always want to see 8 goals flying in every single time, or 7 goals as it was against Ipswich. And you certainly don't want to be 1-0 up for 90 minutes and then concede twice in added time, which is what we did against Man United last season. It's what we did against Fulham this season. So I think over this international break, and it should have been a goal for Thomas Frank and the coaching staff at Brentford from last season, we need to start managing games better, whether that's the crowd getting up, whether that's seeing games out more efficiently, whether that's Thomas Frank being more clever with his subs. I know that he's limited this season because of the injuries, but oh my God, it is not fun supporting Brentford this season, particularly when we're kind of just, the goals are going in, you get one good result that 1 week, and then you're back at home next week against Ipswich in a game where that you're expecting to win, and immediately you're 2-0 down, and then they go down to 10. It's just like these ding-dong games. It's great for the neutral, but I'm not a fan. So I think just chaos summarises that. But within that chaos, I do think that this new style of football, which we kind of saw spurts of last season, pre-Ivan Toney coming back from his ban, we are playing attractive football. And I think this season that's come at a bit of a cost. We're one of the highest scorers in the league, but we've also conceded amongst the most goals in the league. And obviously there's reasons for that. The fullback issues, the fact that we're having to play Sepp van den Berg at right back, or left back, as it seems, or forcing Mads Roerslev into the team somehow. Thomas Frank's reluctance to try out Jayden Mbeumo on the left, Christopher Ayer's injury. It all kind of culminates in what we're seeing week in, week out, which is a really good attack, which we've known, which we said at the start of the season. We said, if we've got Bryan Mbeumo and we've got KLP and Kevin Schade and Mbeumo and Wissa and all of these attacking players who are great in attacking situations and great at standing up their man and creating chances, overloading the box, etc., that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But I think, whilst we've been so fun to watch going forward, defensively at times, conceding 3 to Ipswich, conceding 3 to Spurs, conceding 2 to Fulham, conceding 2 to United, we're yet to keep a clean sheet this season. And that seems a little bit like the necessary cost for being so good going forward. But in terms of, that chaos, it is kind of translated into being really great going forward and being really terrible at the back. And I think in terms of playing nice, attractive football, obviously that translates into goals. It translates into playing the ball along the floor. And some of the screenshots that I'm going to get into are going to highlight the pedigree of goals that we're scoring has been really impressive. But as I'll go on to in the next thing we've learned in terms of the relationship between Nathan Collins and how good he's been this season and how comparatively, I don't want to say poor, but I think a lot of people have been saying, and me included, I don't think Ethan Pinnock has had the greatest start to the season. So we're going to look at those stats. But just before we do that, I do want to talk about some goals that we've scored this season that I think we saw kind of a little bit last season towards the back end when we came back after that last international break and we played Burnley and Luton and Sheffield United. We started to see Brentford without Tony. We started to see that kind of realisation that, okay, we need to make a new approach, or we need to adopt a new approach here. We don't have that target man. We don't have that out ball. We're going to start playing the ball along the ground. And with Mbeumo and Wissa and Bryan Mbeumo up top, it seems like a good recipe. Let's just jump straight into some of the screenshots because I haven't spoken about the Bournemouth game and I don't know about everyone else. Let me know in the comments what you think. But I thought, we took a little bit of time to bed into the game. The first 20 minutes, I think Bournemouth should have maybe been 2 or 3 up. But after that first 20 minutes, we weathered the storm a little bit. Obviously, they get their goal from that Sepp back pass. But after that, I actually thought we grew really well into the game. And some of the goals that we scored and some of the goals against Ipswich, which I also haven't spoken about on this channel, we're taking a little break. But we're back now. I just want to highlight some of them because they've really impressed me in terms of the link up between the midfield and the strikers. This is, I think, a contender for goal of the season so far. I know Bryan Mbeumo has been scoring bangers and bangers after week. But I think for me, in terms of a proper team goal, and you can see the interplay between Janelt, who, by the way, I think I need to kind of admit I was wrong about a little bit. Ever since that criticism that I levelled at him in terms of if there's going to be one that's going to come out of the midfield, it's actually been Christian Norgard that's been playing poorly and Vitaly Janelt that's been playing out of his skin. But we knew this about Janelt. Yes, he lacks a little bit going forward at times, but there's been a few cases, one I'm about to show you, where his link-up play with Wissa and his link-up play with Bryan Mbeumo and him being that kind of interchangeable role with Mikel Damsgaard, whether one of them sits and one of them goes forward, he's been really impressive. He's more that box-to-box 8, whereas Christian Norgard is the sitter. And I think Vitaly Janelt can do both. I don't think Christian Norgard can do both, but I just think Norgard is probably better as a 6. He's just going through a bit of a rough patch. But as I tweeted out on the Eden Road podcast account, those never last too long. So don't completely rule out Christian Norgard just yet. But I just want to play it up here. So Nathan Collins is the third goal against Bournemouth, the winner. Nathan Collins is retreating for the ball. Evan Nilsson's trying to get back, ends up deflecting off Evan Nilsson. Ethan Pinnock picks it up on the left. Vitaly Janelt with a beautiful dummy to get away from Antoine Semenyo. Keane Lewis-Potter is going to come in on your left-hand side. He plays the bounce pass, and this is like something that I've been highlighting, the passing network, and I feel like whoever Keane Lewis-Potter is playing with on that left-hand side, whichever of the 8s comes through, if it's Mikel Damsgaard or if it's the left-back in Christopher Ayer, or in this case, Ethan Pinnock, who is a left centre-back, his passing networks between the sort of the defence and the midfield and the wingers, he's always a great bounce option. He's always willing to take the ball in, give it to someone else, make the run to go further on, or on the off occasion he will beat his man. We're going to talk about Keane Lewis-Potter a little bit later on in the video, but this, again, great play between KLP and Vitaly Janelt. Vitaly Janelt's ball here perfectly weighted for Mbeumo and Wissa to just skip through one-on-one with the keeper. And when Mbeumo and Wissa gets into the situations, we know he doesn't miss. This, again, like I just highlighted against Ipswich, KLP, after we're 2-0 down at this point, again, kind of taking a bit of time to react to actually what's going on the pitch. But KLP picks up the ball and he was the bright spark against Ipswich, and he has been in a lot of games this season. Gets away from 3 people, feeds in Vitaly Janelt, who knows where Wissa is. He's already looked to see whether Wissa's making this run. Feeds him in, and we know the rest. Again, against Ipswich, some more life play on the ground. That's what I mean in terms of the chaos. We're conceding so many goals, but it's nice to see that we're going forward with a bit of momentum. Mads Roerslev picks up the ball. Bryan Mbeumo offers a tidy little bounce pass into Mikel Damsgaard, who's then going to set Wissa free. And this is the kind of interplay that we seldom saw last season, right? We were struggling with injuries. We were bedding into a new system. We had to play with Neil Maupay. We had to play with Saman Ghoddos. We were just making do with what we had. This season, we're still making do with what we have because we've got a bloody lot of injuries. But it's positive to see us developing these patterns of play, whether that be down the left-hand side with KLP, or in this instance down the right with Bryan Mbeumo, and having that spearhead of Yohan Wissa, who is always looking to go. Next time you go to the G-Tech or next time you go to the game, if you're at Everton, if Yohan Wissa starts, and there's question marks around this because Yohan Wissa and Bryan Mbeumo were both hooked during their international duties, but if Yohan Wissa starts, just look at him. Whenever Bryan Mbeumo picks up the ball, he is looking to go, because those two have such a good synergy. They're always together off the pitch, they're always together on the pitch, and whenever Bryan Mbeumo has the ball, just look at Yohan Wissa, because he's always going. He doesn't in this clip, but there was a few times that I spotted it during the Ipswich game, and I'm sure it will be the same against Everton. But when Bryan Mbeumo has the ball, when he's got a little bit of space in these kind of half spaces in the attacking third, you watch Yohan Wissa, he is always looking to get beyond his centre half. He just needs to time his runs a little bit better. There was an instance in the United game where the exact thing happened. He timed his run, but he's unfortunately a margin offside. But in this instance, Mikel Damsgaard plays the ball, and we know the rest. Yohan Wissa buries it. But, you know, this, like I mentioned, this comes at a cost. I think we've been so fluid going forward at times, and we've been so clunky defensively. And for me, listen, you're not going to get a bigger fan than Ethan Pinnock than I am. You know, his story, where he's come from, being at Forest Green, then Barnsley, then the Premier League, and now being one of the most consistent, if not the most consistent player in our Premier League era. I just think he's struggling to adapt a little bit. And in the Ipswich game, some of the clips that we're going to go through, they weren't clips where he's giving the ball away and there's errors leading to goals or errors leading to shots. In this instance, Ethan Pinnock comes short to try and mark Sammy Szmodics, but similar in a way, and you'll know that if you watch my Wolves full-time show, when he pocketed Strand Larsen whenever Strand Larsen came deep, I don't really know what the strategy was here, because obviously Sammy Szmodics is a different player to Strand Larsen. He's got bags more pace and he's probably better on the ball in terms of in those tight areas. But Ethan Pinnock gets drawn to the press. Calvin Phillips has got time to play a pass. Hurst gets a little bit of luck with the deflection that comes off Collins, but again, there Ethan Pinnock's retreating, Sammy Szmodics in on goal, and we know what happens from there. Again, similar situation. A ball gets pinged into our into the middle third of the pitch, and Ethan Pinnock gets tight to Ogbene, who I think that is, slips, and then alarm bells are ringing purely just straight from this action. Ethan Pinnock on the floor, Ogbene, and you've got runners there, you've got a runner there, and you've got a runner here. You've got Norgard, who's supposed to be our 6, protecting that back line, nowhere near the ball. So, again, there's danger there. Ball gets picked up, Ethan Pinnock's out of position, and we know what happens there. And just a little caveat as well, I was speaking to someone at work about this. How many times, and this isn't a criticism, let me know in the comments, and Craig, if you're watching, you're going to be angry at this, because I have seen, and I haven't showed it in these clips, but I have seen that dinked finish against Mark Flecken about 4 or 5 times this season, I want to say. His one-on-one ability, I'm not sure about it. Let me know how you guys are feeling about it. I know that, you know, there's been a bit of a Flecken remontada ever since the City at home game last season, but in terms of saving one-on-ones, he has not shown anywhere near the levels that he was kind of showing in spurts last season. But I've seen this dinked finish, and you know the one from Hurst when he gets in, about 4 or 5 times this season, and I need to see Flecken either doing something different in these situations, or it must be an initiative from the striker or from the striking coaches of the opposition teams that if you get into these 1v1 situations with Mark Flecken, dink it, because you will score. And that's what's happened about 4 or 5 times this season. So I think he needs to be better in these 1v1 situations and start, I don't want to say, because he owes us a couple of these big saves. I think he has made some big saves, but none from one-on-one positions or 1v1 situations. If you can remember one, please do let me know in the comments, because I hate bashing Flecken, but I think it's an area of his game that he needs to improve. We have just spoken about Ethan Pinnock, and I want to dive into some stats. The rest of this video is going to be largely stats-based, but we're going to be talking about sort of how they translate on the pitch and their kind of strengths and weaknesses. And I think a common theme this season has been that Nathan Collins has been arguably our best player, which is quite surprising given his track record. You know, last season we kind of had that debate. He's either really good, really bad, and no in between. But I think this season you're actually starting to see Collins as a more cultured, he's calm on the ball, he's making a lot of blocks, making a lot of tackles, and he's probably been our best defender. And both of them are having to cope without natural fullbacks either side of them. And I say that, but Mads Roerslev has played, but the game against Fulham, he was pretty bad. So it's difficult to kind of fully judge them without a Rico Henry and without an Aaron Hickey either side of them. But just looking at the stats, Ethan Pinnock and Nathan Collins this year, one of them's adopting one role, one of them's adopting another. I just want to show you in terms of his progressive carries here, 0.91 per 90, whereas Ethan Pinnock is 0.09 per 90. Progressive passes, Collins is better. Progressive passes received, Collins is above him. So it's clear that Nathan Collins is more comfortable on the ball. That we can say for sure. But in terms of the passing as well, I just want to highlight the amount of passes they're completing per game. As you can see here, 16.6 short passes completed for Ethan Pinnock, 17.6 short passes for Nathan Collins. It's the similar pattern in the medium passes. The only bit where they differ is the long passes, which suggests that Ethan Pinnock is going longer more often than Nathan Collins is, because I think Nathan Collins is definitely a better passer of a ball, but whether Ethan Pinnock is dwindling on the ball too long sometimes, which I think has been a theme that we've seen in certain games, he's opting to go longer, and when he doesn't go long, he gives it away, which means that we concede a goal like we did against Spurs. But he's just, I think when Ethan Pinnock gets the ball in these situations, because he doesn't have that immediate left-footed outlet on his left-hand side, and because he's struggling to adapt to this new system where, you know, the clear approach is to play out from the back, play out from Flecken, play the ball along the ground, he's getting a little bit stifled at times, and that's reflected in the stats. Just going down as well, Ethan Pinnock's role this season, it has been his role throughout his whole time with Brentford, is to be that disruptor at the back. As you can see, the pass stats differ. Collins is more comfortable on the ball. He makes more passes. He attempts more short to mid-range passes, which means he's playing the ball along the floor a lot more. But as you can see, tackles, Ethan Pinnock's ahead. Tackles won, Ethan Pinnock's ahead. Challenges, they're about the same. Tackle success rate, they're about the same, but Ethan Pinnock's just ahead. The only bit that Nathan Collins is actually superior is blocks and block shots. And, you know, Nathan Collins, he has about 4 or 5 of these blocks every single game. There was one against Bournemouth where he leaps in front of a shot, and it's just superb to see him develop from last season. And it's kind of a pattern that we see with a lot of Brentford signings. It's a year maybe kind of just starting to break into the team, and then from there it's progression. It's what we've seen with Mikkel Damsgaard, it's what we've seen with Keane Lewis-Potter, it's what I hope to God we're going to see with Kevin Schade, but we're seeing that pattern with Nathan Collins now, and it's credit to Frank and it's credit to the coaching staff. The signings that we thought were duds, or the signings that we thought hadn't quite come off yet, are starting to come off, and we're starting to see them flourish a little bit. But as you can see from the stats, what I'm trying to kind of explicate from this is that Collins versus Ethan Pinnock, that dynamic, I think is going to get better. It will get better with injuries when they come back. But at the moment, Nathan Collins is that clear orchestrator. He's the one doing the passing. He's the one with the more touches. He's the one kind of controlling our build-up play from the back. And when Ethan Pinnock tries to assume that role, you can see that he's running into trouble. You can see with the amount of errors leading to shots. 2 for Ethan Pinnock and 0 for Nathan Collins. But I think there's been more than that for Ethan Pinnock. I could have sworn. But anyway, Nathan Collins, I think, has been tremendous this season. Nathan Collins has been really, really good this season. Ethan Pinnock, defensively, like pure defensive stats. You're not talking about building out from the back. You can see that he's above Collins in those respects. And in terms of the duels won, I think I checked, he's about the 91st percentile in terms of aerial duels won in the Premier League this season. So, you know, Pinnock is still doing all the things that we know Pinnock for, but he just has to get better at these little subtleties in terms of playing out from the back. And I think Nathan Collins is there. Pinnock's just a little bit behind him. But I'm not too worried about Ethan Pinnock, because as with Christian Norgard, I mean, I say as with Christian Norgard, but I don't think I've ever seen a sustained period where Ethan Pinnock's played badly, whereas I have seen that before with Christian Norgard. But he will come good, have faith. He's been, pound for pound, one of our best signings that we've ever made, especially in recent history. So he's had a slow start, but he will get better. So moving on to the next player that I want to talk about, and that is Keane Lewis-Potter. And it's difficult. I was kind of doing the planning for this video. I didn't really know what I wanted to talk about in terms of KLP, but I knew that I had to talk about him because everyone's talking about him, especially in the Bournemouth game, in the Ipswich game. He's played leading roles. He was a little bit disappointing at Man United. No one played well against Fulham, but I actually thought out of the attackers, KLP was probably the most productive or one of the most dangerous out of the 3, if not the most. And he's being utilised. You know, he's got this reputation now for being a bit of a utility player. I know that he played in different positions when he was at Hull, but as we're going to see from the stats that we're going to dive into, at Hull he was far more attacking, and he's kind of been crowbarred in at left back or left wing back, and he's doing a fantastic job. But if you look at his attacking stats this season, as you can see, they're terrible. They're really, really not good. And obviously that is by virtue of the fact that he's playing out of positions in most games, and when he does have that freedom. And when we've got more options at left back or right back, when he's got that freedom to actually play at left wing, I'm sure that we'll see better numbers from him. But in terms of the eye test, he's passing it for me. I think, stats can show you a lot, but they also don't show you a lot of the game. I think in most games I've seen KLP play this season, whether he's putting up numbers in terms of progressive carries or assists or goals or shot creating actions or anything like that, he passes the eye test. I think we can all agree that. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about KLP when you go to the games, when you watch him play. But in terms of his attacking returns, 31st percentile for progressive carries, 28th percentile for successful take-ons. And what the interesting thing is that he's actually quite high in some of his defensive numbers. 94th percentile for clearances, 75th percentile for tackles. It's because he's doing all of his work a lot further back in the pitch. And as we'll see, I've taken some of his stats from the season in which he was the Hull Supporters Player of the Year, Hull's Players Player of the Year, and Hull's Player of the Year, when we signed him from Hull, when he won Championship Player of the Season. Look at the metrics and just look at how far behind he is in terms of his per 90 stats. Progressive carries 2.82 per game this season, 3.52 for Hull in that 21-22 season. Shot creating actions 2.12 per 90, 2.52 per 90 at Hull. And then what really illustrates my point here is that he's just been completely... It's not to his discredit or anything, it's actually to his credit. He's been able to flourish in these different positions, playing at left wing back, playing at left back, adopting a more defensive role. And look at his defensive stats, 1.88 tackles per 90 this season, compared to 0.43 in the season at Hull when he won all those awards. Tackles and interceptions are both up. Touches in his defensive third is up. Touches in his midfield third is down, but touches in his attacking third, again, is down. And it's just a reflection of where he's playing. And it's difficult to kind of judge him off these stats because he's been doing a job and he's been doing it well. But what we want to see are these kind of numbers. If he's playing in the position that he wants to play in, you'll start to see him get some goals, I hope. He got 12 in that season and 3 assists. This season, he's only got 1 assist. So we're not seeing attacking returns from KLP, but I'm really pleased with the job that he's been doing, and he's kind of been forced to do it by virtue of the injuries that we've had. But I do think he's going to be a really important player for us this season. And again, it's another example of one of these players who we thought hadn't kind of provided that justification for the price tag. You can't forget that we paid a lot of money for KLP. He's one of our record signings, or certainly probably one of the top earners at the club. And whilst we're yet to see those attacking returns in terms of the metrics and the goals and assists, he is playing a lot better and he's being asked to do different jobs. So credit to KLP. I think he's been really, really good this season. We hope that we start to see some of those attacking returns as the season goes on and as he starts to play in his preferred position more often. The fourth thing that I think we've learnt this season is how bloody good Mikel Damsgaard is. I think what makes the story of Mikel Damsgaard so much better is that I've spoken about it before in terms of he wasn't that kind of data-driven signing that Brentford normally do. He was one that Thomas Frank really liked, someone that he worked with before in the Danish youth setup, and someone that he brought to the club, that went against the grain in terms of that traditional way that Brentford like to do things. But, from the arthritis problems to the injuries to when he's come on, he's looked too lightweight to just not looking up to speed with the Premier League and not really looking like that player that we thought we were getting. It just makes it so much sweeter that he is now fulfilling his potential. And if you think about what Mikel Damsgaard is good at and what he's shown this season, first of all, he's getting a lot of assists. Second of all, he finally scored that first goal, which has been such a long time coming. And he could have made more of the celebration. It was like he scored against his old club. But assists and goals, we're starting to see that now. Hopefully more goals to come in the future, but certainly assists. I think he's up to 5 this season. What else has impressed me is that in the games where we've played poorly, he has been our main threat each and every time. In the United game, he was our main threat. He was a bit quiet against Ipswich, a little bit quiet against Fulham in particular, but I think everyone had an off day that day. But I think when you think about what Mikel Damsgaard is good at, he's good at picking up the ball in pockets, he's good in tight situations, he's good at taking on players, getting past men, feeding those little balls through for Mbeumo and Wissa and Mbeumo to get on, putting crosses into the box. Getting his head up, I think, is a really, really big one. Next time you watch Mikel Damsgaard, in a similar way to what I'm telling you about Mbeumo and Wissa and when Mbeumo gets the ball, next time you watch Mikel Damsgaard, you see the amount of times where he'll feint for a shot and play a little ball into Janelt, who's in a bit of space. He did it against Bournemouth really, really well in the first half. But he's always got his head up. He's never wasting opportunities. And obviously that's a directive from flank. We don't like shooting from outside the box. But Mikel Damsgaard, he's great at disguising his passes. And he's just like more than the stats that I'm going to show you, he is someone that absolutely 100% is passing the eye test at the moment. Some of his intricate touches in midfield. I'm thinking about the little flick against Wolves, I believe it was. Picks up the ball in our defensive third, but takes it into their defensive third by just giving one little touch around the corner, another touch over the head, and he's gone. But those are the little bits of play that I'm seeing from Mikel Damsgaard have been so encouraging this season, and it just makes me so happy because there was a player there, we just hadn't seen it to his best extent, and now, this season especially, partly due to the injury to Matthias Jensen, I think we're starting to see the best of him. We definitely are starting to see the best of him, and good gosh, look at his stats. Look at these stats. They are incredible. Near the top for assists, near the top for expected assists, near the top for non-penalty XG plus assisted goals, near the top for shot creating actions, progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, touches, progressive recoveries, tackles. Even his defensive game has been so good. Like he is one of the statistically one of the top performing players in the Premier League this season, and he's starting to get recognition. I've been listening to podcasts, I've been watching YouTube content, and people are starting to cotton on to the fact that we have picked up a real gem in Mikel Damsgaard, and he's kind of been the unsung hero of our side. You'd only really know about his presence in the team and about his impact if you watch Brentford a lot, and he has been tremendous. Mikel Damsgaard is going to have such a brilliant season if he continues on this trajectory, and I know that Brentford fans are going to be so happy about it because he's been fantastic and he leads the way in metrics of everything this season in terms of your defensive work, in terms of your attacking work. He's top of the pile in all of it. So here's to Mikel Damsgaard. Continue to do well, and let's hope he has an excellent season in terms of maybe notching a few more goals. He's only got one so far out of 11 games, but for me it's enough just to see him on the pitch sometimes. He's so agile, so diminutive, the way he gets around the pitch, the way he disguises his passes. I'm just loving it. I'm just loving it from Mikel Damsgaard. The last thing that I think we've learned about Brentford this season is that the Brian Mbeumo, Yohan Wissa partnership is straight cash money. These two are the most productive partnership in the Premier League this season, and it's just like their chemistry off the pitch is definitely translating to on the pitch. But what I really want to talk about, and I'll be really interested to see what you guys think in the comments, is I actually think there's an argument to be made that Yohan Wissa has actually been better than Brian Mbeumo this season, and that's not taking away the moments that Brian Mbeumo has given us. He comes up clutch in so many games. I'm thinking of the Ipswich game when we looked like we were going to somehow come away with that game with a point against 10 men. I'm thinking about the goal against Spurs. He's got all of these. He's a moments player, right? And he rises to the occasion, and from the penalty spot he's ice cold. I can't really see him missing a pen anytime soon. He's a big game player and he does perform, but he doesn't perform on a consistent enough basis for me, and I know that seems weird to say, but he does go missing sometimes. And it's all well and good doing that if you're going to be putting up the numbers that he has been putting up. It doesn't bother me because he's scoring so many goals and he's contributing to so many points that we have on the table. But Yohan Wissa, considering he's played fewer games than Brian Mbeumo, and he scored one fewer goal. He's on 7, Brian Mbeumo's on 8. His goal per minute ratio, his goal per game ratio is sky high. I'm pretty sure he's up there with some of the best in the league. But I feel like what you can't measure in terms of the stats, and we're going to dive into some of the stats as well, but what you can't measure in terms of stats is when Yohan Wissa came off against Man City, we all said on the podcast, I think everyone was kind of thinking it, when Kovacic came in and he made that tackle, and it was a horrible tackle by the way, but we all were saying, how are we gonna do it with Schade and Mbeumo and KLP? Because it's not, you don't have the one that links it all together. And I think Wissa is that. He is the one that comes deep, can beat a man, can bring others into play, can win fouls high up the pitch. He is that player. And I feel like if Brian Mbeumo were to get injured, God forbid he doesn't, but if Brian Mbeumo were to get injured, I don't think it would have as much of an impact on the team as if Yohan Wissa was to get injured for a sustained period of time. Because I think we've got the replacements in terms of Kevin Schade and KLP and Gustavo Nunes and how they're going to come into the team as well. But I do think Yohan Wissa has been pivotal, considering we don't have like a natural number 9 to replace him. Obviously, we do now with Thiago coming back in the team, potentially. Don't want to say it too soon because, as we know with the Brentford medical team, it's never that straightforward. But he's so pivotal, and I really do think there is a case to be made that Yohan Wissa has actually been more important or better for us than Brian Mbeumo has this season. Looking at their stats, 1.1 goals per 90 for Yohan Wissa, which is incredible, which is exactly what you want from someone who had 3 games out and came back. And when he gets into these situations, you never think he's going to miss. That was showcased by his smart finishes against Bournemouth, his smart finishes against Ipswich. You just never think he's going to miss when he gets into those situations. But just as a comparison, like, this isn't taking anything away from Brian Mbeumo. I'm going to highlight this section here. Plus 3.7 non-penalty expected goals, which means he is the biggest overperformer of XG in the whole league this season. He scored 8 from around 4 XG, which is just insane. Like he's been so clinical this season, and if he continues with this form, which is what we kind of saw last season before the Brighton game, he will be up there in terms of goal involvements this season, in terms of the top of the table. Like he's only second behind Erling Haaland this season. He's tied with Mo Salah. This guy's going places. Like it's in all likelihood we're going to lose him in the summer. But I really do think that Mbeumo and Wissa has done an incredibly underrated job this season, considering he had that big injury about halfway through, to come back and kind of hit the ground running and be present in every single game. He's always present in every single game. I don't think you can say the same of Bryan Mbeumo sometimes. I think he kind of goes in and out of it. But Mbeumo and Wissa, he's just been so impressive. But just to highlight another one of Bryan Mbeumo's strengths, 3.76 shot creating actions per 90. Which is bloody good. They're both fantastic in terms of what this section is. I think we've learned that in Bryan Mbeumo and Mbeumo and Wissa, we have one of the best partnerships in the league. And it kind of goes back to the chaos thing. We've got Ethan Pinnock and Nathan Collins who are struggling to gel, particularly Ethan Pinnock, but we've got Bryan Mbeumo and Mbeumo and Wissa at the other end of the pitch who are just flourishing. And long may that continue, because those two, when they're on it and their relationship, and you see the kind of the relationship they're building on the pitch, when they know exactly what each other are going to do, when those two are on it, it normally follows that the rest of the team is as well. And if we can score more than the opposition, I think the mantra this season is going to be try and outscore the opposition, because it looks like we can't defend at times, or it looks like we can't go a game without conceding a goal, which we haven't done all season. So I don't think it's that fun to be watching Brentford at the moment. It's obviously good for the neutral, but it does, even in the last 10 minutes of the Bournemouth game, you kind of watching thinking, God, when are we going to concede? And it was such a surprise that we didn't. But again, we're top of the points lost from winning positions this season, like we were top of the points lost from winning positions last season. So I do think it's going to be a long season, but like what I'm trying to say is I don't think we're too far away from actually pushing a bit higher up the table. If we get Rico Henry back, touch wood, if we get another right back in January, or Christopher Ayer comes back sooner than we think he might, then I really don't think we're too far away. And going into the Everton game, it's going to be difficult. First of all, I think whenever we've played a Sean Dyche side, it's always been difficult. He's kind of been one of those managers that seems to have Thomas Frank's number. What I will say is that we're going to Everton this season, I think, playing a different style to what we've played them before. Certainly in terms of being further along in that development, further along in terms of the way we want to play. I think we played them very on early last season, and that was probably our worst performance, if not one of the worst performances of the season, when we played them at home last year. And then when we played them away, Ivan Toney was back, so it was different. But this time, I think, it's always difficult with Goodison Park. But this time, I do think we might have an edge in that Sean Dyche hasn't come up against the Brentford side that's looked so potent going forward that as we have this season. And that's what's given me a little bit of hope for the game. Obviously, the amount of goals that we've conceded is a worry. But Everton aren't notoriously high scorers. They win games by 1 or 2 goals, and they have done since Dyche has been there. So I'm not expecting a high-scoring game. It's not at the G-Tech, so that might be a little bit of a hint towards that it's not going to be a high-scoring game. But I'm not expecting an amazing game. But it's definitely winnable. Everton, they've been good in patches this season. They started off horrifically, but they've kind of levelled out since then. But they're still close to the relegation zone, whereas we're looking like we could be pushing a bit further higher up the table. There's only 4 points that separate third to where United are just a place below us in 13th. So we've had the 2-week break. Hopefully Bryan Mbeumo and Mbeumo and Wissa aren't injured from their international duty. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we get to see Igor Thiago and Gustavo Nunes kind of feeling their way into the team. When they come in, there's going to be a full video on that, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But hopefully, I think the 2-week break, we're going to come back into it. It's going to be a test, and it's going to give some indication as to where we are after the international break, if the Bournemouth game didn't kind of do that already. But I think, at the moment, it kind of looks like we're bang in the middle, because, we've won 5 games, we've lost 5 games, and we've drawn 1. So we're literally a bog standard mid-table team at the moment. But what we all want is for us to go above that. And I feel like when the injuries come back, particularly Rico Henry, and we give a bit more solidity at the back, and there's a little bit more cohesion in that back line, something that we haven't really seen this season, then I do think we have the necessary constituents to be pushing up the table. Let me know if I'm being optimistic with that. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment down below. Follow my socials. Links for that will be in the description. Link for the Eden Road podcast will also be in the description. And please, just before I go, please share this around with your friends. I know that I got a really good response on that Wolves full-time video, but since then the views have been going down a little bit. So share it around with your friends. If you think someone will like this kind of content, let them know about it. I do feel like this channel is offering something that other channels don't. I'm going into games, I'm taking screenshots, I'm looking at some of the stats, I'm diving into some of the tactical trends that we're seeing on the pitch this season. And if that's your cup of tea and you think it might be someone else's, please share it around. And I'll see you guys on the next video post Everton, and let's hope for 3 points.